Hi there, my name is Fadi Ideson. I want to welcome you to the Art of Procurement podcast, the podcast that helps you, a forward-thinking procurement professional, position yourself and your team to proactively take advantage of the revolution that's taking place in procurement today. By interviewing industry trailblazers and sharing insights from our own experiences, my team and I pull back the curtain and shine a light on the strategies, tactics, and tools that procurement teams are using to elevate their impact. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by Fadi El Mouallem. Fadi is a 20-year veteran of procurement and strategic sourcing, having worked as a practitioner and procurement leader at companies like Apple, Salesforce, and Lennar. Most recently, Fadi was Vice President of Global Procurement Operations at Salesforce. And in today's episode, we focus on the topic of building and enabling amazing teams. Fadi shares his insights in a number of areas, including the importance of being able to step back and take in the big picture while also keeping an eye on the details, purposefully pursuing a broad range of talent and backgrounds when introducing someone new to the team, and the many forms that organizational influence can take, and why it always starts with a human connection. Now, as always, I started by asking Fadi if he found procurement or if procurement found him.
Well, that's an interesting question because I feel like we both kind of connected at some point. And definitely, I think I found procurement because of my past engagement and career journey. I had interest in the space since I started as a cost engineer, dealing with procurement RFPs and initiatives, and diving into contracts. And so I would say I found procurement, and then we became a good match.
Yeah. So you were telling us about how we were buying things too expensively based on the cost engineering and cost modeling you were doing then and getting us into trouble.
Exactly. And yes, I did a lot of proposals for companies, and I used to refine the language of how to make it compelling that this price is right, and do not negotiate me down.
What kind of products or services were you doing cost engineering for?
It's actually architectural products, so
Okay.
expansion joint systems for large commercial buildings, and some architectural metal, which is anything that's complex that fits between two different systems that they move.
Right.
And this is usually a very busy area in earthquake heavy California state.
Yeah, having lived in, we talked about this before we went on air, having lived in California, I think that's probably one of the things I don't miss of being in California is being woken at 4 o'clock in the morning for an earthquake. And
Exactly. And
you hope the architecture is good enough to stand.
yeah, exactly. Especially now things are happening in Turkey. We hear about it
Yeah.
in the news. It's unfortunate. And that's not too far from where I'm originally, which is Lebanon.
So, given that background in architecture, how does a discipline like that, there's a lot of art and there's a lot of science in architecture. How does that impact your thinking today from a procurement perspective?
That's a great question. And a lot of people, they ask me this. It's like, how did you move from architecture to
Right.
procurement? I mean, those are two different words. In reality, I don't think so. From a thinking perspective, the creativity and having a vision to imagine something before it's done, it's powerful. And getting your brain trained in that direction give you that strategic outlook that you can foresee things before they happen in a way that you always have to think strategically. That's one lens. The other lens is the micro detail, because architects, that's what they do. They design the whole concept, and then they start developing it till the minutia, like the little
Right.
details, the nuts and bolts, right? And I think that's macro and micro capability gave me an ability to see the big picture, but also zoom in at the details when it's needed.
So I guess you got to do a lot of testing of hypothesis as you're, building or designing, whether it's spaces, whether it's buildings, from that macro to the micro level too.
Exactly. And you have like random data points. It's not really a structured thinking from the get-go. It's really conceptual. And in procurement, usually you start always with a lot of like random ideas from the business, that many times you're going out with minimal information and you have to put it all together.
Yeah. So you moved from the architecture into procurement. We talked about that. You actually, I believe, moved into the real estate category for procurement as the jump, I guess, from one into the other.
Mhm.
Did you find that having that background as an architect, or just so much as being able to speak the language of the stakeholders that you're working with, that had an impact on how they embraced you as a procurement professional?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was definitely an advantage, competitive advantage for me to speak the language,
Hmm.
especially in industry like construction and real estate. Your negotiation leverage, the way you handle things, the way you set up your team, it makes a whole lot of difference in an industry that's very heavy in procurement. By the way, I mean real estate and construction is very very heavy in procurement.
Hmm.
Everybody does procurement without knowing, right? From the project manager to the suppliers, the contractors, the general contractors, they all do procurement. It's all
Hmm.
about procuring material and labor uh, in order to complete the building. So,
So how do you then position yourself or your teams from a coming from a procurement background or perspective as somebody who can actually add value when every stakeholder believes that they can do what procurement does, or not believes, that's probably a harsh way of saying it, they do it, they're doing it on a day-to-day basis. So how can you come from the outside and convince them that you can bring value?
well, that's where really we take a step back and we look at things from a more strategic and holistic point of view.
Hmm.
Because it's known that when people are in the trenches, they're focused on the problems they have at hand and trying to solve them. They miss the big picture a lot of times, and that's
Yeah.
what happens in any category. It's like if you're, that's why check and balances are important. Also, separation of duties, very important. It's like what you do is really, and what I do, they're totally different things. And we've had times where my team, who are real estate practitioner, in many times, they want to roll up their sleeves and manage the project.
Yeah.
And I tell them, no, this is not our job. Just take a
Hmm.
step back and do what you're supposed to do. Otherwise, you lose your competitive edge, basically, and what you're supposed to do on this job.
So that's interesting, that because it's something that I think we struggle with is you are fighting for relevance as a procurement professional sometimes in these situations, and therefore you just want to be helpful. And being helpful means doing any job that is available to do as a way to kind of demonstrate your value. I think it's hard to step in and say, actually, that's not what I should be doing, because actually it may create reliance on you to do the wrong things within an environment, because you become this crutch for the stuff that nobody else wants to do, as opposed to you have a strategically defined role in this project and you got to stick to that lane.
Exactly. And it's always important for any procurement professional to bring that external perspective in.
Hmm.
Like you always want to be the bridge between the inside and the outside, well versed with the marketplace, with benchmarking, understand the data, and bring that perspective in to the organization.
Yeah. If you have folks on your team who um, do not have specific expertise in the category that they're supporting. So, you had that real estate, that architecture background as you went into the real estate category. As you're going into a category that you don't have that experience in, where do you go for that level of insight that enables that you are showing up with something more than I'm procurement and I'm here to help?
That's a good question, and always a question in the industry whether you need category specialist or
Hmm.
industry specialist to be able to be successful. I don't think so. However, I think procurement, the way I set up my team, I don't bring similar talents like copy paste. They have the
Yeah.
same resume. I always diversify my talent pool. I always bring different type of talents to my team. I don't mind having a marketer
Yeah.
on the real estate side. I don't mind having an IT person on the real estate side. Actually, they bring that different muscle into the team. And that's how I set it up. I had a transactional expert, I had a project management person, I had a person that she had no idea about all the project management aspect, but she had cost consultancy
Yeah.
background. And another person that was in the sales industry that brought a different dynamics and different values. So I think it's you can leverage. There is a lot of transferable skills
Yeah.
that you can leverage across any category in procurement, in my opinion. The key thing is to be curious,
Hmm.
willing to learn, and think creatively outside the box.
Yeah. No, I'm definitely with you in terms of the do you need category expertise or not? And maybe that's my bias as I never really had category expertise, but I took, more of that relationship and collaborative approach to my stakeholders. And so you're bringing just enough that they see you as being somebody that that they can partner with, even if you don't know, but you're curious enough to ask all the right questions rather than coming in assuming that you know everything. Um, I'm interested, you talked about the diversity of the people that you would bring to a team, different backgrounds, not necessarily procurement backgrounds. I think it's easy for us sometimes to over focus on traditional procurement skills and under focus on some of the skills you just talked about. I'm interested when you bring in folks that don't have that procurement background in, what what do you feel they need to know about procurement to be effective? Is it just a really small portion of what somebody who's been in the profession 20 years knows, or like how are you helping them become a procurement professional who happens to know and have more experience than being just in procurement for their career?
Yeah, I think soft skills always, in my view, trumps technical skills.
Yeah.
This is what you need to have. Just be yourself and be willing to learn. It's not a hard craft if you think about it. It's learnable, teachable.
Hmm.
If you're passionate and you're curious enough and you understand the role, what you're supposed to do, and how you position yourself, and you know how to build relationships, I think you'll be successful.
Now, one of the challenges that we have um, is driving change. We're in the business of driving change,
Mhm.
but it's also one of our greatest challenges is to help influence the organization to change. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of your experiences in helping to drive change and perhaps some of the things that have been fundamental to your success in that area.
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, the last couple of years, I've been involved in a lot of those transformational journeys at Salesforce. Driving change requires a vision. You have
Hmm.
to have a vision and a point of view. And that's very important for any leader. The other element is you have to be convincing, compelling,
Yeah.
and in order to influence the outcome. And you can't force your way in. People have they need to listen to you, and they need to really trust you, and that package, if you want, is really part of the formula
Yeah.
to how you're gonna unlock change and enable change. But change is a definitely it's a journey. It's not a destination, and it takes multi-level and multi-layer of iterations in order to get to an outcome, and it's a continuous process.
How I like the fact you said a continuous process, because I actually just recorded actually today a podcast around transformation that will be published, in due course on art of procurement. And, we talked about transformation as an event versus procurement transformation as a continuous improvement. And how it being an event provides you with a time frame to focus minds on, but how change is really an ongoing continuous journey, without necessarily a strict beginning and an end. I'm really interested when you said it starts with the vision. Um, how do you set the vision when you're beginning that? Whether you're starting with a blank page, um, and thinking around what can procurement be, what kind of operating model can I build, what goes into that vision?
I think definitely vision requires experience,
Hmm.
and someone that can think through the future based on taking into consideration all the factors, and be able to communicate that vision. And that doesn't mean that the vision is gonna be kind of perfect from the get-go. It needs to be negotiated. It needs to be defined, discussed with a group, and
Hmm.
I think agreed upon. It's not just a single person thing. It's a team thing, and usually in companies, vision comes from the top. Like
Yeah.
this is the direction where we're heading, and we reiterate that vision in our kind of organizations or subgroups or business units based on what's applicable to us.
Hmm.
But the vision is our north star. Let's say, okay, we want to be more digital over the next 5 years. We're gonna transition from this to that. So taking that theme and ask yourself, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to procurement?
Hmm.
And how can I get there? Uh, Answering those questions, I think, will put the words to this vision. What's the theme? Basically, define that theme for procurement. What's that vision should look like, and communicating that and having people push back, that's okay, and sharing that with the team and see what do you think, getting some feedback. I think that reinforces that vision to make it more inclusive.
Hmm. Now, as you built the vision, like we talked about procurement, being a driver of change, and a big part of driving change is influence.
Mhm.
I know that the area of influence is something that you've really spent a lot of time focusing on in the roles that you have, because influence doesn't necessarily come from title or position. It comes from personal relationships, as you just said before, and knowledge. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about, how do you think about, or what forms really does influence take
Yeah,
from your experience, from a procurement perspective?
absolutely. It takes different forms. It's really about building that relationship first,
Yeah.
and having that, taking that relationship next level, which is a trusting relationship, right? And that's where you start to connect with the other person, whoever that other person is. It could be your supplier, it could be your business partner, it could be your team. For example, in your team, if you want to influence your team, you want to be the coach, you want to be
Mhm.
the mentor, that person that really cares about the team and cares about each individual, about their career, about their growth potential, and give them that guidance genuinely.
Yeah.
And people will notice that. And that's the recipe for starting that influence journey over a team member. Same thing applies to a business partner, where it might not be the same relationship of coaching and mentorship, but trusted advisor. We
Yeah.
always use that terminology in procurement. We're a trusted advisor, but what does it mean? You gotta show care and interest in that business and the success of that business, and make sure that you're investing the time to connect with those leaders and business partners to understand their pain point and be able to advise from your perspective of what's gonna be working for them, or what can I do to help.
Hmm.
That becomes a kind of an element of influence. On the supplier side is really caring about that supplier and
Yeah.
partnership, and looking after their interests. When they're strapped on cash, help them with some, with expediting invoices here and
Mhm.
there. When we're negotiating terms and condition, be fair. Yes, I want to have a competitive rate, but also be fair. Don't squeeze them too much to a point where they're on the verge of bankruptcy. So business partner suppliers will notice that, and I've done this over the years, and they care about giving you the best of the best. If you care for them, they want to work for you.
Yeah, if you can be their advocate,
Absolutely.
that goes beyond, yeah, you may have had a tough negotiation, and I completely agree, not squeezing everything out of them. I think we have an ethical responsibility not to, as well as it's just not good business to have the risk of of having your suppliers be financially stretched by supporting you because something will give. But being the advocate so they feel like you care, I think goes a long
Absolutely.
way.
You have to think as a business person, not just
Mhm.
as a procurement bean counter. I mean, basically, at the end of the day, you're a business enabler.
Yeah.
Procurement is a business enabler, and there is no company that's going to grow without its suppliers. It's a partnership, and usually a few suppliers, few strategic suppliers that you take them along with you, that's gonna make or break your business.
Mhm. You talked about being a trusted advisor. I wonder if there's been circumstances where the trust has been broken, and so then you've looked at, okay, how do I come in and fix that? or coached a member of your team on how to fix where trust doesn't exist because I'm sure this is something that that procurement professionals listening face every day, where that trust just isn't there, and it may not be that it was broken, it just never was there in the first place because you didn't have the opportunity to build it. How should we think about entering situations like that?
Yeah, we have to be expert at building relationships. I call it like dating. You have to show up.
Yeah.
You have to be there. You have to listen in. You have to understand their pain points. Be their student. That's okay, to the leaders, because you're learning from their businesses too. They're more involved in their day-to-day business. They understand what they're dealing with, and a lot of the business partners, they're trying to solve their problems and immediately, and they're gonna go and find the fastest and quickest way to solve it. If it's not through procurement, it's gonna be through them. So I think where trust is broken is usually where there is disconnect between procurement and the business on the relationship side,
Yeah.
and they're talking different languages, or the procurement is kind of advising without having that in-depth knowledge and intimate relationship with the business.
Mm-hmm.
So we should set that aside and get down and meet with the business and really have a conversation, open conversation, and help serve the business and support the business before anything else. We enable the business before we start negotiating.
I'm really interested just to ask. So your most recent role was with Salesforce, a very large software company who's grown, exponentially over the years, but has their basis in CRM, customer relationship management. And we talked a lot about relationships so far. What I'm really interested in is like, how can you track the health of the relationships? Because I think about from a sales perspective, that's what you will use your Salesforce or another CRM tool as a way of segmenting your potential customers and then understanding the health and understanding some signals that so you know where to focus on. Is that something that we can do in procurement?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And you're giving a lot of listeners ideas for startups right now, because this is an area where I think it's emerging. And I know a couple startups that are looking into this area, how they can create a kind of a productized supply relationship management. Although the term exists in the industry, but it's not really, the code has not been cracked yet,
Right.
On that specific area. Absolutely. And I think the future around procurement and supply chain is around that exactly. What the pandemic taught us is you've got to have very good close relationship and visibility into your supply chain and supply base.
Yeah.
So absolutely, we should be able to monitor and measure and the health of the relationship and develop it. Because it's not static. It's a moving target, and a lot of companies, with ESG going on right now, uh, we help develop those attributes or those values with partners, because we want everybody to look like us if we're ahead of the curve when it comes to sustainability, diversity, etc. So it's not about cherry picking anymore. It's about working together and development, and that those what you mentioned is going to help.
Yeah, I've long thought that's kind of the missing piece for us in procurement, is that sales and marketing teams are so sophisticated with the data that they're able to collect and the seeing signals and intent signals and lots of other things related to the way that that those people who they want to build relationships or maintain relationships are interacting with them. And we really don't do that in procurement so much. We may do it through manually tracking meetings that we've had, or some metric to go and have a coffee or a virtual coffee with your stakeholder once a month, or things like that. But we truly don't harness the opportunity that a more formalized stakeholder relationship management, supplier relationship management, whatever it is, platform could bring in terms of knowing when's the right time to engage with who, so that we can be more proactive.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely an applicable use case right there.
So as we start to wrap up, I've got one last question. We've talked around thinking from a macro view. We've talked around, what goes into building teams and thinking about procurement operating models. I'd love to just kind of leave listeners with an understanding of where you see the future of procurement and how procurement is evolving and how that may impact how you're thinking around, whether it's operating model design or how you set up that procurement team or what you're focusing on. Like, we see so much out there around what potential procurement should be. Where would you be putting your bets?
I don't know if we put our bets in one bucket. I think it's gonna still rely on the what I call the trio, the tree-like stool of people, process, and technology. Uh, on the people side, procurement will remain driving expertise in areas and transformation leadership in the space because they understand the big picture of the business and the levers that they have to pull to transform that and optimize the business. Process and technology is going to keep evolving. I think now with artificial intelligence, we're going to see a lot of capabilities coming through.
Right.
And again, I'll be speaking about some of that in conferences that I'll be presenting in. How we can leverage technology to drive spend behavior, for example. And this is a big topic because a lot of times we negotiate contracts, we negotiate pricing and rates, but actually the biggest saving lever is not spend or spend better.
No, it's demand, isn't it?
Exactly. And how we can influence that lever, it's going to be very valuable for organizations. And it's very interesting how technology is going to be taking procurement beyond just process automation around people behavior of how we spend and getting more insights and intelligence from the data to drive that.
Yeah, we think of that as differentiated decision making. How are you then using all these insights? Because that's where, I know the term competitive advantage is a little bit of a cliche, but that's really how you drive competitive advantages. What different decisions are you going to make based on all the available information? And all the efficiency plays are great, but they're short term because everybody in the end will end up mimicking and doing the same thing. So at that point, there's no competitive advantage from, that digital transformation. It's really going to be on what different decisions are you making.
Exactly. And it's not about just standardizing processes, actually getting more tailored processes in a way that differentiate you as a business, because that's exactly to your point. That's your competitive advantage. If we're all the same, what's the advantage of each company if they run their procurement the same way? It becomes really a flag. I don't think companies that they are deep in supply chain, that they have manufacturing background, they understand that perspective. I worked for one of them in the past. Procurement for them, even on the indirect side, used to always be, I'm willing to take a 1% improvement, and because they know that this is going to give them that advantage. If I can push the contract faster, if I can get more visibility to data a little bit more, I can be ahead of my competition.
Well, I want to thank you, Fadi, for your time today and sharing some of your experiences with us. I have one last question. This one should be the easier question of the day. That is, if anybody has listened to the conversation, would love to connect with you, reach out, get to know you, what would be the best place for them to go? Where should they find you?
LinkedIn is the best place. LinkedIn. Fadi Mouallem is my LinkedIn, and that's the best place to link in.
Well, then I will put a link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes for today's episode. Those are going to be at artofprocurement.com/podcast. That's artofprocurement.com/podcast, along with all the other podcast episodes, the 560 plus, I think, that we have now there. And you'll find this podcast among them. So, Fadi, one last time, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
If this episode struck a chord with you, please do send it to somebody. We grow here at Art of Procurement through word of mouth, and that would be really appreciated. You can also support us by giving us a thumbs up, a star rating, or a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. Since 2015, we've built the world's largest free resource for procurement professionals looking to elevate their impact. Our resources span podcasts like this, videos, blog posts, papers, and events. To join us on the inside and to ensure you never miss an episode, a webinar, event, or a post, please do subscribe to our weekly newsletter, This Week in Procurement. You can do that at artofprocurement.com/subscribe. That's artofprocurement.com/subscribe. Thank you for joining us today, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.